Good evening. We're going to go on and get the meeting called to order. Representative Williams, would you open us with a word of prayer? What number are you?
All right. Let us pray. Almighty and everlasting, thou art eternal God, we thank you first for this day. We thank you for this committee. We ask, Lord, that you stay among us and remind us that we are our brother's keeper. Now, Lord, bless us, for we lift your name up mightily. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Representative Williams. It's been a long day, so we're going to try to go on and get through this meeting today and move on. First item on the agenda is SB 99. You go when you're ready.
You
Senator.
good, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, first off, Mr. Chairman, congratulations on your role as the new Game and Fish Parks Committee Chairman in the House.
I love my counterpart.
I look forward to our working relationship in both the House and the Senate, so glad to be here today. Senate Bill 99, very quickly, very simply. Many of you are familiar with when you get a driver's license, you have the ability to decide whether or not you want to be an organ donor. What this would do is when you get a hunting and fishing license through DNR, it gives you the same opportunity to make that decision whether or not you want to be an organ donor. There is no cost to DNR with the provisions of the legislation, and that's what Senate Bill 99 does, Mr. Chairman. I'd be happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Do we have any questions? Just to clarify, the department was good with
Yes, the department DNR is good with the underlying language.
Okay. Look.
The only problem I had with it when my wife deer hunts with me, if she ever needs an organ, I'm not going to hunt with her anymore. But it could split up a marriage. I just wanted to make that public.
So are you going to make the motion?
I'm prepared to make a motion at the proper time.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, I'm make a motion to pass.
First and a second, any discussion? All in favor say aye. All opposed? All right, we're going to sit tight. We're going to go on, and Chairman Harper's going to sit right there and go to SB 72.
For passing Senate Bill 99. Look forward to getting that through House rules and on to the floor of the House. I believe Representative Vance Smith is carrying that legislation on SB 99. SB 72 is a bill that we have y'all have seen in some shape, form, or fashion. Last year we were just not able to get it all across the finish line. It's what I called the omnibus bill last year, and that's what it is, dealing with hunting and fishing regulations in our state. It updates the code in regards to a WMA license based on what we passed in House Bill 208 a couple of years ago with the complete license update. It legalizes the use of air guns and air bows for hunting purposes in Georgia. It modifies various regulations for bag limits and seasons for a variety of game species under the code and gives DNR board some flexibility in that regard. I can go specifically into that if you need me to. It gets rid of the 50-yard prohibition in regards to feral hogs and supplemental feeding of feral hogs. And changes that definition to where it would only be if you do it in a way that would cause hunting on adjoining property to be illegal. If you remember, we had a long discussion about that last year, and basically this just makes it a little bit easier for our law enforcement counterparts in DNR to be able to regulate that at the same time to be more clear in the code, and also give more alignment with the deer code in regards to supplemental feeding in our state. It also changes the term conservation ranger. This is new to game warden throughout the code. As you know, we refer to our guys in the DNR law enforcement, guys and gals in DNR law enforcement now as game wardens, and we no longer refer to them as conservation rangers, and that's what this bill does, and we recognize that in the code. And there is also one other amendment that was added on the floor of the Senate in regards to the use of silencer or suppressors, I should say. As you know, there was a ban on use of suppressors at night, and that took that ban away, and also for hunting purposes only. And also for hunting purposes, you had to have the permission of property owners to use suppressors. Well, we also struck that out because you got to have the permission of the property owner to go hunting on their property anyway. So we seen that as a cleanup to the suppressor language in the code. That's what the underlying Senate Bill 72 does, Mr. Chairman. I'll be happy to answer any questions about any of the specifics in there. Obviously, DNR has no issues with the underlying bill that's before you. And actually, I've worked with them obviously very closely in trying to get this bill to where it's at. And so that's Senate Bill 72, and I'd be happy to answer any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You have a few questions. Why don't we go to that? Number 2. That Representative Tarvin?
Yes, sir. I just want to clarify, there's nothing in this, let's see who's in here. There's nothing in this bill that would prohibit me from calling my friends who are game wardens squirrel sheriffs, is there? I mean, I can still call them squirrel sheriff.
You can call them anything you would like, Representative Tarvin.
Thank you.
But I would be very careful in what you do refer to them as.
I said my friends.
Okay, all right.
Do so at your own risk. All right, let's see. Number 7 is that Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just for clarification, I don't remember, haven't read the bill, but expound just a little on prohibitions relating to restrictions on feral hog hunting.
So under current law, you are legal to supplementally feed feral hogs in Georgia. There is one prohibition, and basically that says you can't do it within 50 yards of a property line. So if Representative Williams, if you and I owned a property adjoining to each other, whether you and I agreed that we could feed on our property line if we wanted to, under the law that would be illegal, even though you and I have agreed that we want to do that. Getting rid of this 50-yard limitation allows property owners the discretion to make that decision themselves, as long as you're not, as long as obviously when those property owners agree, you're not causing any other form of hunting that any of you want to participate in to be illegal. And obviously that would be at discretion of DNR law enforcement and in consultation with the adjoining property owner. So that's what it attempts to do. So it doesn't make anything, so it's already legal to do it. We're just getting rid of that 50-yard prohibition.
I just never understood why there shouldn't be open season year round on feral hogs. You should just shoot them when you see them.
Well,
however you shoot them.
This opens it up even more to do that, Representative Williams.
Makes it easier for you to do
Just kill
so.
'em
That's
all.
right.
Thank you. All right, number 3, is that Chairman Barr?
Yes, sir. Thank you. I appreciate this, and I'm with you. Number 1, let me say that. But I do have a question,
'Kay.
and I'm not sure. So on 108, we're talking about deer hunting, and we say September through January 15th, except that, and then we state what we're talking about, and then it says to January 31st for archery only.
Okay.
Is
so
that
I can explain that. So if you'll you've skipped over kind of the meat of it, but so what this does is it takes out the specific counties and where archery would be allowed under state law. So currently under state law, you can only archery hunt deer in those counties up to January 31st. What this will allow is for the DNR board and the Department of Natural Resources to decide any county in Georgia could participate in archery hunting up to January 31st. So this just sets bookends, and it gives DNR board the authority based on wildlife management practices and sound wildlife science, as especially as is mentioned through 114 through 117. the DNR can adjust those by region, by county, or locale. So they have the ability to make that adjustment.
One follow-up.
Yes,
and,
sir.
And maybe I wasn't clear. I want to make sure that they have the ability to do this however they need to January 31st. But because we're specifically saying archery only, is there another section for gun hunting?
No. So this will only deal with archery only. It will not allow
After the
for
after the
yeah.
close of
This
normal
is so.
season. This gives DNR the opportunity to come in and extend it for 2 or 3 more weeks in certain areas if they need to.
Specifically for bow.
Only for bow.
Gotcha.
So
Not
January
muzzle, we're not
15th
muzzle loading. We're
No.
not.
No.
Okay.
January 15th is the hard deadline for deer season.
Gotcha.
From January 15th to January 31st, DNR has the ability to make a decision that they could open it up for archery season only at certain localities throughout our state, and that's what this gives them that authority to do
And
that.
this
Thank you.
this
That clears it up.
originated.
Sorry.
Last year we had this big discussion. Little southwest corner of the state,
Right.
rutting doesn't come in till late, so they wanted that option of possibly asking for that.
Perfect.
So
Thank you.
that's what. Okay. That Representative LaHood, Chairman McCall.
On the same page that Representative Barr was on down there on line 128, is that in case they have to go in and clear deer out of a state park or something other like that, it won't count against?
Yes.
Okay. All right, and then the hog deal, the reason that 50 yard was put in there was when we couldn't bait in North Georgia.
That's correct.
And then the other language keeps it from being next to somebody's duck pond.
That's right.
Okay, and I agree with Representative Williams. I just think we need to add white-tailed deer into that fact that you can kill them all year long too.
Thank
But-
you, sir.
Could I ask one more?
Yes, sir.
Back on line 47, where you're talking about the air guns,
Yes, sir.
I have a friend of mine who messed up and has a felony. He does a lot of trapping, but he has to use a pellet gun. Can he use one of these or not?
I think he can use one of these, actually. My understanding of the law.
We asked that question last year, and I don't tell you
Yes. So I'm afraid to say this. He just said it. Yeah. So air guns are not federally regulated, and because they're not federally regulated, they're not subject to the felony prohibitions under Georgia law.
Thank you.
Would that be a accurate statement?
Representative Larikia, floor leader.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm glad I made it back in here with Senator Harper up here doing his little testimony. But my questions are simple, and it's kind of like what Representative Tarvin said last year. Are we going to get to hunt more with more opportunities, with more weapons?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Chairman Petrie.
Yeah, just a quick question. Just want to make sure that I know the answer to this, but we have not, the September 8th to January 15th is already in the current statute.
That is correct. That is
And
current
my
law.
understanding of the additional language we've added is because there are areas of the state where the rut is later, particularly in the southwestern part of the state. And I say all that to say this. I have always been somewhat frustrated. I'm a big deer hunter, but also small game. And I'm an advocate for small game hunting because that's how you get children involved. And so the length of our deer season does have a negative impact on people having opportunities to small game hunt in this state. And so I don't want to extend the deer season, but I do understand the value to this, and this is not a mandate. It is going to give the department
That's right.
flexibility, and I support it.
So
Thank you.
To your point, Chairman, I think this is a very tailored approach to a happy median between our big game hunters who want to have more opportunity and our small game hunters who want to continue to do what they do. And I think this meets that objective. So thank you for your comments.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Are there any more questions? Representative LaHood.
All right, just had a quick comment. Wanted to thank you, Senator Harper. I do hunt in the south west part of Georgia. Rut does come in later there, and this allows us more flexibility. I've taken my boys to hunt in Alabama on Martin Luther King holiday for the past several years because that opportunity doesn't exist in Georgia. So I think this will be good for a lot of people. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you, sir. Any more comments or questions? Yes, sir, you got it. Do I hear a second? All right, I've got a second. At this time, I would like to offer an amendment. Ledge Council, you're going to have to make sure I do this correct.
He's gonna offer your deal.
Okay, all right.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we accept what originally was House Bill 357 by Representative Buckner that makes the shoal bass, or what unique native riverine fish, is that it?
Yeah, the state riverine fish.
State riverine fish, okay.
Mhm.
So they all have copies of this? Yeah. We passed this out last year.
Yes.
We passed this out last year and it just
got
got,
over on the dark side and got messed up. So
Well,
they are,
I've come to savor.
Tyler is,
Chairman McCall.
Tyler is coming back to the good side. of this.
I'm all about trying to make sure we take care of our house members.
So I move we accept this amendment.
yeah, I got a motion, I got a second. Any more discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay. All right, so now we have a substitute or bill as amended.
House Bill
Put your
72 as amended.
put your mic and tell me.
Oh, I just didn't have it over here. I thought I talked loud enough. Senate bill, yeah. Do pass Senate Bill 72 as amended.
Do I have a second? Have a second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Chairman, and I understand you're gonna do the good work on carrying this bill through the House process. I
Yes, sir.
appreciate you.
I'm gonna try to live up to your standard.
Yeah. I appreciate it. Thank y'all very much.
Thank
Y'all
you.
have a wonderful rest of your day.
You too, thank you.
Y'all come see us.
All right, next on the agenda, we have House Bill 501. Chairman Petrie, you can sit there or go up there, whichever. Okay. I know we've got a, is the sign-up sheet out there? Okay. And I want to say, when we get time to discussion and on the sign-up sheet, since it is late in the hour, we've got another meeting out there waiting to happen. We're gonna limit the discussion to 3 minutes per person.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, and I'm asking, with your permission, I'm asking DNR to come up here to be available to answer any questions that I may not be able to answer. I hope I can answer all your questions.
I don't
But,
blame you.
I've got them with me, and if you are ready, I will begin. So I bring you today House Bill 501, LC number 450255ER. I think everyone has that before them, and what we are trying to do here. Many of you may be aware we have about a $1.7 million oyster and clam industry in Georgia, wild Georgia-grown oysters and clams, predominantly clams, and but we are trying to do something that other states have done, and that we believe could be great for Georgia and for some of our coastal counties, and that is to provide for the mariculture, the farming, if you will, of oysters in Georgia. And I think everyone here is aware. I'm a coastal guy, born and raised on the islands, and so our oysters grow in clumps, okay? And that's not exactly what most people today in the restaurant industry, they like those singles. And to grow those, in Georgia, you really have to do that through a process of farming them. And that is what this bill does. And so I'll begin. I'm going to go briefly through here and kind of point out some of what you need to know. And then I'll stand for questions. So this farming activity would be done, as you look down through some of these definitions, it will be done, first of all, it's important to say, in the subtidal zone. So our tides come in, ebb and flow every day. The subtidal zone is that area of the water bottom in our estuaries and creeks along the coast that is always inundated with water. Okay, it is not exposed to a lack of water at any time. That is typically the 4 to 5 feet of depth and exposed underwater at all times. You will see here in starting on section 73, number 7374, this bill that you have before you allows the board to promulgate rules and regulations on all of these issues that relate to size, possession, creel limits, etc., and of course the siting criteria, which is going to be very important, that we'll talk about in a moment. As you look down further, you'll see that a commercial fishing license will be required. We are describing the individuals who will have these leases that we'll talk about in a moment as master harvesters. Individuals that work for them are titled in here and defined as harvesters. And I'm just going through page by page and kind of highlighting. I do want to call your attention to number 117. Line 117 references that permits may be revoked. That is a code section 27-2-25 that is customary for all other fishery type activities. So crabbers, shrimpers, etc. There is a allowance by the commissioner to revoke those licenses. So this is in keeping with current practice. Much of this is current law, as you'll see. I'm not going to get into that. There will be no change to the way wild oysters are harvested today by hand. No change to the quantities of clams and oysters that can be harvested wild. None of that is changing in here. But on page 7, you will see that the commissioner is authorized to open or close, and this is an important section, for the purpose of taking shellfish any or all portions of the salt waters of this state. So the commissioner is, and the department will determine when the season is, if you will. My understanding is the season is likely going to be year-round, but all of that will be at the discretion of the department. There is on line 226, however, a route for a master harvester to, even if there is a closed season established by the department, there is a route for a harvester to seek the ability to farm those waters, even in the off season, by going through a process of requesting permission from the department. And that is right there beginning on line 226. On line 236, you're going to see references to training. All of these harvesters will have to be trained, and that is essentially what happens now. So our wild oyster harvesters today have to be trained. That training is typically done in the DNR office, and so that is just going to continue. That is information that is used to train is coming from the NSSP, which you'll see here is the National Shellfish Sanitation Program. They use that information to train these individuals and will continue to do so. The likelihood is now, of course, with a new way of farming and collecting oysters, there will be some additional training that is added to the current training, but it'll be essentially handled the same way, is what I want to point out. Okay? There is, you'll see on line 239, the ability to revoke or suspend, again, a master harvester's permission if indeed they're violating the conditions that they operate under. On line 253, all of this is related to wild oysters. So to make sure that, this bill is long, and I just want to emphasize that in this section at the bottom of page 8, we're talking about wild oysters. Most of this is not changing. This is wild oysters that we currently harvest in this state, and you can see that there are some words that are changed there, but essentially we're continuing to do the same thing we have done. On the next page, we begin speaking on line 268. We shift to the Department of Agriculture. Department of Agriculture will be responsible once these oysters and shellfish are harvested and they move out of the water and on the hill. Then it is then, and my understanding is both departments are absolutely confident in this bill and have had all of their issues addressed with particularly food safety, which is the big issue. I think everyone here is aware that if you don't handle oysters properly, they can carry disease, particularly Vibrio. And so it is very important that we have our departments confident in food safety. If we're trying to establish a vibrant new fishery and opportunity for coastal folks to make a living off the waters we're so blessed with, the last thing we need is a disaster. And so we need to make sure that our departments have had input into that, and they have. My understanding is the Department of Agriculture is quite well and should be here today to speak to and is here today to speak to that issue. Much of this is in current law, being properly tagged and labeled. All of that is required now. Now let's go to the bottom of page 9. I do apologize again for the length of this bill. I do want to emphasize something here. So there are two types of leases proposed in this bill. And at the bottom of page 9, you'll see on line 302, we talk about leases and intertidal water bottoms that basically is the first type, which are the wild lease. So the wild leases, in this this is not a change with the bid process. It's just changing the name, right? So I just wanted to make sure I'm looking at Doug here to make sure of some of these issues. So the process today and the process that would continue for wild oysters is a bid process for garnering these leases. That will remain. If you go down to the top of page 11, so all of page 10 is speaking again to wild leases. Very little has changed here. At the top of page 11, we go to that which is new. And all of this language, as you will see, is new language. The new lease for mariculture, for farming oysters, is a lottery system, and you'll see that mentioned on line 348 through 350. So these will be handled differently than a bid process which is handled for wild oysters. These will be handled through a lottery system as established in those lines. On line 362, you'll see that these will likely be 10-year terms. This is different than harvesting wild oysters. This is much more complicated. There's a lot of equipment and a lot of investment involved. So we've extended the term of that lease to 10 years, up to 10 years, let me say. Up to 10 years. And so you will note that much of the language on 365 on down relates to leases being transferred. Once an individual has these leases, with the death or the illness of an individual that has a lease, these things are inheritable. With an individual that may choose to no longer farm these, there is, with the permission of the department to an appropriate individual, the ability to sell those leases. All of this is consistent with what we do for the crabbing industry, et cetera. So the department is trying their best to be consistent in how we handle these different fisheries. All that again on page 11. Trying to think if there's anything else that I want to emphasize before I answer any questions. I would encourage you to look at page 14. There is a performance bond required. Again, these individuals are going to be required to have much more invested in the process of harvesting oysters than an individual that's doing this wild. And so there is a $20,000 performance bond required. All that language is new. And then down at the bottom of the page, something that's real important that I want to emphasize, almost finished, and that is a couple of things. First of all, The department is going to certify shellfish hatcheries and nursery operations within the state. There's a concern that is so important to me, and that is that we don't bring disease to our, we have the finest water quality on the eastern seaboard, and we've got one of the most protected coasts in the country. I dare say the most protected coast. We want to make sure that we don't have people bringing diseased products or seed from other locations, and so we want to make sure that the department is determining where these hatcheries and nursery operators, what we're bringing into this state, into the waters of this state. And then finally, I want you to see on 483, and this is part of this, the seed have to be certified disease-free by an approved, the statute says an approved shellfish pathologist, okay? That is, now I want to emphasize something, that is current practice in this state. The department requires that now, but it is not in statute. What we're going to do is put it in statute to make it clear. It has been custom, but it needs to be in statute, in my opinion, and I believe very firmly in that. And finally, you have language on line 488 and forward that speaks to the number of cages that may be deployed. All of this, again, the purview of the department, the maximum number of cages, and a fee for same per cage. And so those are the issues that I believe were most important, Mr. Chairman. I know it's been a long day, and I hope I didn't go too fast. I know everyone here has had time to look at it, but I'm glad to stand for any questions and have the experts from both departments to answer them if I cannot.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Very good. Representative Donahue, you have a question?
And I'm gonna jump around a little bit. I love
Please.
oysters. Okay, that's,
Yeah, me too.
I'm pretty much an expert on the taste of them and the saltiness. What I want to
Somehow I
ask,
believe
one of
that,
the
Mr.
things
Representative.
really, trust me, I'll compete with anybody here. $20,000 as a bond, is that basically what we're saying that, let's say, and I'm going to ask you another question on this, master harvester, okay? So if they do something wrong, this bond is kind of like an insurance policy to pay toward correcting whatever they did, or what is this $20,000? There's a lot of fees. I just don't want you to start charging me every hook I use when I'm fishing and stuff, so I like to follow in this path. There's $20,000. What is this secured for?
Well, that is my understanding, but I'm going to let Doug Haymans speak to that because he might be more appropriate to answer that.
Sure. If you happen to see what happened in the Gulf when the hurricane came
Right.
through this past summer, several of the news articles showed pictures of oyster aquaculture cages up on the highway.
Yes.
Right. So what we're looking at in the bond is if you have a natural disaster strikes, and we may have 100 to 500 to 1,000 cages in one operation, right? If something happens and those cages are dispersed on the marshes, on the uplands, and that individual can't afford to go get them, we need a way to be able to do that. And then, believe it or not, it's also happened where individuals have gone out of business and left gear behind. This is a method to go get that. It's not for
Retrieval and,
right.
okay.
Right.
Further yield?
Yes, I would just add one thing to your first question, Representative Donahue, and that is that similar to what Mr. Haymans just said, indeed, we've had, after hurricanes, I've actually had in my district alone multiple, believe it or not, abandoned shrimping shrimp boats piled up on the land that nobody would remove, and that we had to find some way to come up with a way to remove them. So I'm glad that Doug answered that, though. Next question, sir.
And and I understand on Lake Lanier, we'll have abandoned houseboats. We have different things that there's a cost factor to move. Let me ask you the definition, I've been around too many attorneys here, for master harvester.
Yes.
And with that, I want to ask, who picks whoever's going to be farming this, or does everybody apply to farm? And there's certain standards, they go through the training, how much the cost is. I just want to kind of get a grasp of how we're picking and who's picking. Sometimes down here we pick winners and losers, and that's not our job. I want to make sure everybody that's capable has the right, but at least kind of grasp that.
So, long answer, and I'll try to make it short.
Yes, sir.
Currently, we have master collectors and pickers, and because we're going to aquaculture, we saw a need for a name change with that, so they're harvesting. So master harvester and a harvester is the laborer. And that master harvester may be certified by the Department of Agriculture or uncertified. In other words, he doesn't have an uphill facility. The way that this is envisioned, let me back up. Currently, an individual is interested in harvesting oysters. They identify an area that they're interested in. They bring that to the department. They demonstrate to the department that they are capable of doing this. Then that lease actually has to be put out for bid to the general public. And anybody then can bid on that. And then that person who wins the bid has to provide us a management plan where we go back and look at whether this individual is capable or not of farming this or of growing these oysters. So when we move to this new method, that stays in place for wild oysters, but we gather that there's lots and lots of interest out there for this new aquaculture. If we take applications in that same manner, we feel like we'll be inundated and that we will be months and months and months of getting through this. So the idea is that it's a lottery system with pre-qualifiers. This industry to get in is an estimate $30,000 to $50,000 per acre, and they may be looking at anywhere from 1 to 5 acres. So there's a significant investment. If there's not some proof of capital, whether a line of credit from a bank or something, that's first. Does the person have some background in the industry? Have they, either worked for another harvester somewhere? Do they have some background that allows us to believe that they're going to be successful? Because the last thing we want to do is to lease to someone a public trust resource and they fail. We want these folks to be successful. And so, yeah, there's a lot of things that are put into the management plans when an individual applies to us to make sure that they, I'm going to say, have the wherewithal but are capable of being successful.
Follow up one more too.
I want to finish speaking to that. Doug has already answered you well, but I want to call your attention, if you would, to line 348 again to 350. And what you will see there, again, to answer your question, there's going to be a subset of individuals that meet all the criteria. We have to begin with people all of which are qualified. And then, almost like you do your quota hunts through DNR, you're going to have a lottery because there may be well more people than we have the resource to use. But if you'll look on those lines, you'll notice something that was important to me. Preference may be given to certified firms, leaseholders, and state residents. So just like we have a quota system that often has preference points for one thing or another, that's what you have here. But it ultimately would be a lottery, again, for the mariculture side, not for the established wild oysters.
So like a preferred lottery if you qualify for everything versus a lottery that if you're just getting into the business. Let me ask a follow-up here too. I invest in something. Number one, I either have the money to put my investment myself or I have to look at going to the bank. One thing I caught here is the DNR may choose to close down the season, and sometimes on that discretion, I want to make sure that I didn't just go out and borrow 60 or put 100,000 of my dollars in, and then all of a sudden, because of somebody else, that bank's going to say, "Wait a minute, you might be working 6 months, 4 months, or 8 months." I want to make sure that that's fair too.
Yes.
So that has been one of the common questions about this, and understand this. This is not a unique fishery for that.
Yes, sir.
Federal fishermen are closed 5 months out of the year to snapper grouper fishermen.
That's right.
And they don't know when a quota is going to be reached, so they don't know when it's going to close the other 7 months out of the year. Shrimping in this state right now is mandatorily closed March 1st through May 15th. The commissioner may reopen that fishery June 1st. It might not be until July. He may extend into January or February. So there's a lot of science that goes into count sizes, spawning condition, those sorts of things for the shrimping industry. So this is not unique in that. But we do intend to maximize as much as possible those individuals who can harvest year-round. And I mean, we want them to be successful, so we're not going to cut their legs out from under them by closing without a good reason.
Well, and the reason, one follow-up, that I trust you guys, and I'm going to go, listen, I don't do this like some people all the time, but let me make sure of a couple things. In Florida, they've really jumped out in the middle of the ocean. You go snapper fishing, you never know. Then they cut trigger off this year, and then the next thing you know, you've got these guys that their livelihood's affected. So what do? You catch a ton of snapper, you throw them back, and you watch the sharks and everything else eat them when you throw them back. I'm just wanting to make sure we're not gonna we're gonna throw common sense into this and not out the window.
Go ahead. I sit on the
Y'all
South-
arm wrestle.
I sit on the South Atlantic Fishery Management Council
Yes,
that
sir.
makes those decisions, and it is not easy. But I'll tell you this, when a fisherman gets into a business that relies on natural resources, they have to expect the unexpected.
Yes, sir.
Guaranteeing somebody that we're not gonna close because of tropical storms, we're not gonna close because fecal coliform counts are too high, that a vessel doesn't land on an oyster reef and lose diesel, guaranteeing that we're not gonna close is an impossible. I can't do that.
And I understand that. Thank you.
And I don't want to belabor this, but I just want to say this. I think he's answered it well. But remember, as he has said, everything we do in our fisheries is seasonal, whether it's shrimping or crabbing, or that's the way it is. And by the way, as an entrepreneur who understands where your question is coming from, every business is different. My brother-in-law's in the nursery landscaping business. It's seasonal too. Farmers are seasonal. So there's a lot of industries that are seasonal, and this is consistent with every other fishery industry we have on the coast.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is that
Is that all you got, Donahue?
Representative Laricchia?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's 16 pages of language here, and a lot of it underlined new language, and it says you can't do this and you can't do that, and you're limited to this. Most of the language sounds kind of shellfish to me.
Is that all you got?
I got it, buddy. I like you, Bill.
He'll be here all week.
Yeah. Hey, hold on one.
Hey, you did good.
Is that Representative Williams?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've been following this bill for a while now, and the intent early on. My big thing is I was born and raised. I was born on the Midway River, and I have watched the ebbs and flows of this industry. And one of my concerns, and it's just a concern that I'm sure you can address, is I want to make sure that the traditional oyster farmer first got some say in the process, and second, they've gotten a share from everything from fuel prices to the cost of boats. I want to make sure, because I've found early in life that no matter how much training you have, some of the biggest experts I ever seen are those who have to do it for a living. I just want to make sure that we don't end up, I don't want traditional oyster farmers priced out of the business. You know, I've watched corporations come in and ruin a way of life all up and down this coast, and I don't want this to happen. I just want to know if they're protected, they're not going to get priced out of the business, and they're going to have some say as to how this is done, because after all, they're the ones out there in the white boots fighting that mud, and they know the business. They didn't learn it at UGA. They learned it in the University of Hard Knocks.
To my friend, Representative, amen. That is one of the first things I said. And so I want to emphasize, yes, listen, when I look at just in my, you know, I've got the coast of Bryan and Chatham, you've got the coast of Liberty, and by the way, a lot of our current oyster harvesters are in your county.
Yes, sir.
And McIntosh and Liberty primarily, is my understanding. NAFTA wiped out our shrimping fleet. We had some 500 shrimpers. Now how many do we have now? 240. So there's been a little bit of everything. One of the first things I said, and that's why I pointed earlier to those lines that talked about state residents. I want people that have experience already to have, obviously they should have preferential treatment because they already understand the industry. And so I'm with you 100%, but I will let Doug maybe speak to, I know your name, Doug. I will let Doug speak to kind of the specific answer to your question.
Harry.
Give me a minute, Doug.
Trying to help. Representative Williams, thank you. So Ernest McIntosh comes to mind. I'm sorry, I apologize. So Ernest McIntosh comes to mind. Ernest is out there making a good living on wild product. He has not made up his mind, to my knowledge, as to whether he wants to get into subtidal aquaculture farming or not. He is interested in using some of the gear on intertidal bottoms. We want to make sure that he's able to do that. But the first question he asked me is whether or not we're going to allow the new aquaculture industry to come up right next to his leases. And my answer was no. We're going to try to avoid that at all costs. But as far as what the market's going to do, I'm not an economist. Didn't stay at a Holiday Inn last night. But the aquaculture industry's targeting a single oyster that's going to sell somewhere between 30, 40 cents, maybe a little more to the harvester, a buck and a half as an individual oyster in a market, in a restaurant. That wild oyster, although he can produce a single oyster from the wild, it takes work. He's still going to be selling, in my opinion, to backyard oyster roast and things of that nature. He will not be able to compete with this single oyster that's going to command a much larger price. But again, I'm not an economist, and don't hold me to those assertions. But we are going to try as hard as we can to make sure people like Ernest can remain a successful, viable business.
Okay.
I'm going to have 2 bushels of Ernest oysters on Monday.
I watched Ernest come into business when his daddy brought him in. Knew his father most of my life. So I am interested, and you've allayed some of my fears, and I appreciate that.
Thank you, Representative Williams. Is Chairman Corbett?
We're good.
You done? Any more questions, concerns? Does the department have anything they'd like to add?
Just one thing to your question as well that I should have mentioned, and that's the idea of the advisory panels, right? So we have a fin fish advisory panel, a shrimp advisory panel, and a blue crab advisory panel, which Ernest is on, right? So we intend to stand up a shellfish advisory panel. We intend for that to have members of the industry, which would be made up of not only wild but also the aquaculture folks, recreational harvesters, a non-governmental, a non-DNR biologist, and somebody from ag at minimum. So in that respect, he's going to have a say as well. Yes, sir.
And Doug, I may make a comment. You may this may help some people. I know some of our neighboring states have been doing this a little longer than us, and I think we've gone in, seen what they've done well, what they've done bad, and we've kind of taken the good parts of that and try to tailor it to hopefully a more streamlined starting operation for us. Is that not right?
That is correct. Yes, sir.
Okay. Hold on. I've got another question. Representative Donahue.
And you
I
know
should have
what?
gone on and moved on, shouldn't I?
This is. I
We
should
shoulda
do
known.
like y'all and say I'm from Hall County and District 30 and all that. But what I want to make sure of is, if you really love oysters, you understand the salty flavor. You understand so much. And they started tilapia farming. I will not eat it. It's the worst fish in the world, and I tell people that. However, the thing I want to make sure of, and I'm not against this, how is this? And I'm trying to grasp it. How is this going to be the oyster? You've tasted them, I guess, from other places, compared to Apalachicola up into Maryland, the different things. I have no idea. I just want to make sure that this is going to be a profit for whoever or whoever grows it, but it's going to be a profit to where they go out, make money, but you're not going to buy these oysters 3 times higher than I can buy them already from somewhere else. And I don't know.
I think I can answer that, Representative. My answer to that would be that all we can do is if the market will bear, if we allow people to do what today they cannot do, and if in a free market world they produce a product that people want and they're willing to make that investment, as with everything else in our capitalist society, then they will sell them and they will be profitable. It's possible maybe they don't, maybe they aren't. So that is, I don't see that as being different than anything else in any new industry that we might incentivize to be here. So they may win, they may not. But I hope that. Our hope is that we will end up and as the chairman pointed out, other states have proven this to be true, that we will end up with a vibrant, vigorous new industry for folks and my and Representative Williams' part of the world.
Thank you.
One thing I wanna say is I agree with all this. The biggest thing that anything with agriculture or what is this?
Mariculture,
Yeah,
isn't it?
mariculture is food safety.
Yes, sir.
'Cause
Amen.
From peanut butter to oyster to anything.
Yes, sir.
And if we mess this up, the oyster business will go away, and Gary Black and Mark Williams will be the ones stuck up here getting fussed at about it. So we got to
It would
do
be
right.
a nightmare, Chairman. And so what I would say is, as a guy who grew up living on the river, I was telling somebody earlier, I used to go fishing with my granddaddy, and we'd be crabbing or fishing, and every so often, you'll pull up a sparrow, you'll pull up an oyster here. My granddaddy would eat oysters right out of the river. I don't know how he didn't get sick back then, but he would eat them right out. Any time he found one, he'd eat it right out of the river. But listen, we have to be sensitive to food safety. If we're talking about creating an industry we want to thrive, the number one issue, as the chairman has said, is that we make sure that we have a product that is safe. And that is why we need to trust the experts at the departments to make these decisions. And listen, I was surprised that the department was okay with a year-round. I would have expected summer months when it's warm that we would not be harvesting. They seem to be okay with that. But that's just, I'm not the expert. I trust the experts to make those decisions, but I very much appreciate, Chairman McCall, your comment.
Thank you. You done, Chairman McCall?
Yes, ma'am.
Representative Bruce?
Yeah, I'm not going to ask any follow-up questions, but I grew up in Harlem, so I don't think I ever saw any oysters growing in Harlem, New York. Harlem, New York. Yeah, but the question I have, and this is you may have already answered, and I just didn't get it. When you harvest stuff like this, I'm assuming there's still competition, where different people are harvesting. And in other products, somebody will say, well, I'm going to add this to my product so that it gets bigger, it gets larger. Or add this to my product so that it tastes more salty or less salty, whatever. Is there anything in here that is going to make sure that they're not really, I guess this is to your point, messing it up by people trying to add things to it to enhance the product?
I think that would be under the
am I
purview of
making sense?
agriculture. That would be agriculture. So the Department of Agriculture would regulate that to make sure that the product is not only safe but also pure, if you will. May not be the appropriate term, but so I think, Representative, that would be the answer.
Add one small thing. So there's a consortium of research institutes from North Carolina to Maine that right now, part of what they're looking at trying to fund is how can they create specific strains of the same species of oyster, but so that they're just different enough that this can be a regional oyster here, a regional oyster there, or another one down, up the state some. Years away from doing that, but there is a consortium out there looking at it, and I'm sure when it's successful, they'll be trying to bring the same sort of idea to Georgia. But right now, across the Atlantic coast of the United States, it's one species, and that's all we intend to ever have is Crassosterica virginica, the Atlantic oyster.
Good. Thank you, Representative. In the case of time, we're going to move on to people that have come to speak. We're going to move on to that. Is Alex here? Yes, ma'am. All right, Alex, 3 minutes, please, ma'am.
Good evening now, everybody. Good evening, Mr. Chairman and representatives. My name is Alex Murin. I'm from 100 Miles. We're an advocacy nonprofit located on the coast of Georgia. We represent over 1,000 members, mostly residents along the coast. Like our partners, OHM believes that it's important for Georgia to grow its mariculture industry. However, we have concerns regarding HB 501 as it's currently written and the way that it would establish this industry. First, I'd like to speak to the advisory panel. We've heard that there is the intent for one to be established. If that is the case, I would like to recommend that after line 86 in the current bill, there is language added. And I have that language with me today that I will be happy to pass along to Representative Petrie. But essentially, it would ensure that there are people working in the industry currently, fishermen, and people working on economic development in Georgia that would be able to advise how we can grow this industry, and they would be responsible for directly transmitting ideas of how this industry can grow to the chairman of Game, Fish, and Parks, as well as the Senate and Natural Resources and Environment Committee. Secondly, the business owners really need to know that they're going to be able to harvest 12 months out of the year without having to jump through the hoops of red tape. Both Florida and South Carolina have 12-month harvesting seasons, and that's because the growers have to follow important safety and sanitary standards, and there are the law itself establishes strict penalties if they do not. And I have language here as well that would could be incorporated to ensure that happens, but mostly this language would replace lines 226 through 238. Furthermore, we would like to see that in the requirement of the a requirement for the operational plans that they would have the 12-month harvest plan included. So these operational plans are already submitted when they are doing mariculture. And so if there is included a requirement for 12-month harvest plans, that could help to mitigate some problems. And that could, again, easily be added into the language. Thirdly, in regards to the leases of subtidal water bottoms, we recommend deleting lines 341 and 356 and essentially changing this back to the public bidding, competitive bidding process. So it would require that you take out lines 341 through 356. There would be the sentence in 302 that begins in 302 would need to be changed to: the department may offer leases of state intertidal water bottoms within an approved growing area for the exclusive rights to harvest wild or maricultured shellfish, or subtidal waters bottoms within approved growing areas for the exclusive rights to mariculture shellfish to in-state or out-of-state residents pursuant to this code and through public competitive bidding. And again, that would require that you make a change on line 228 to include intertidal and subtidal water bottoms. And finally, I just want to say master harvesters, and farmers must be assured that they will be able to import seed.
Okay, thank you. I think we have a comment. Corbett, you have a
Thank you for your passion, but my question goes back to Representative Williams. If we go to a bid system, we're going to price out the little guy. Would that not be true?
Are you asking
Yes.
me that? In my opinion, if you have a bid system, yes, that certainly is a risk, but at least there's a little more control, I think, for the people making the bids. Whereas if you have a lottery system, it's up to fate whether or not those people who are harvesting are going to continue to be harvesting. And might I add that the lottery system only adds 10 years for the lease, which is not a ton of time when you're thinking of the investments.
Okay, thank you. Are there any more questions? I would just like to say I'll be glad for you to get that information to Chairman Petrie and let him take that under consideration. But I just want to make the comment. I know our commissioner and our staff, and I know they've got the best interest for our state and for our people. And I think they have the knowledge and the expertise to make the right call on that for us, and I trust them to do that.
Thank you.
But thank you. Justin?
Hello, my name is Justin Dotson. I am one of your prospective growers, and I want to just thank everybody that we're actually having this conversation. Now I'm going to start off a little harsh maybe, but as it stands, this does not enable in any way, shape, or form a sustainable mariculture in Georgia. We have to have water column, which is a term that's not in there. It's called water column. That means I have a cage, some kind of floating gear, whether a cage or a bag that floats, okay? This bottom, you're asking me, you're forcing me to kill half of my product before I even harvest it. And you would not do that to a chicken farmer or a cow farmer, anybody. If you grow on the bottom, half of them are going to die before you harvest. They're going to get boar sponge, which makes the shell weak, which you can't shuck them then. The restaurants don't want them. And you're going to get mudworm, right? So nothing like biting into a fresh oyster and then getting that nice little splotch of mud. You know, it's an old method of farming. It's been supplanted now with all of the top grow water column farming, that's what all the other states are doing around us. They're not growing stuff on the bottom. There's a few cages out there still in some states like Virginia up north because it takes them 3 years to grow an oyster up there, right? But down in South Carolina, Florida, Alabama, they're floating those cages because they're in the water constantly. They're never exposed from the tides, which the bottom, same thing, but on the bottom, they're much more susceptible to prey, and they're just half of them are going to die. And it's not a viable business plan. I can't grow them and make any money doing that. That's the big issue. Everything Alex said, I completely, utterly second that. That's all things that we need to see in the bill. We need to have a guaranteed growing season that's a year long. Now, disaster happens, oil spill, of course. Yeah, you shut it down. You detect fecal matter. That happened to a farmer I know in South Carolina. They started detecting fecal matter because they're testing the water every month. Well, it turns out there's a bunch of flooding, and a local school had its own septic, and it was running right into his creek, right? So we had to shut that down for a while and not harvest from there. You know, those kinds of things are totally acceptable. But if I don't have a guaranteed year-long growing season and I don't have water column, there's no financial way to do this. It's not going to change what you have now, right? There's so much to comment on because all the different things. You know, Harlem, they don't have oysters because they killed them all back in the 20s and the harbor got too bad. They couldn't grow them, but now there's a $1 billion oyster project where they're trying to reseed them and regrow them. Great project. I just met that man a couple weekends ago. As far as modifying the seed, making them taste different or whatever, GMOing them or whatever, these oysters grow in a bag in a cage that grows right next to the wild oysters. They're being fed the exact same thing, the exact same protoplankton in the water as the wild oyster. There's nothing that you can do to modify that or change that. It's as far as pricing anybody out, every single one of us farmers is just going to help each other. There's no reason not to. There's so much demand. There's not going to be competition amongst us for 15 or 20 more years. And if you have competition around lease sites or having to bid on lease sites, what you're telling me is I have to build a processing facility somewhere, and then I have to hopefully get a lease site, maybe through a lottery, that's close enough for me to get that oyster out of the water, processed, and into a cooler before, with time and temperature rules, before it makes it, I can't sell it, or I have to put it back in the water. And I can't build out that, make a business plan and build out that facility if I don't know where my leases are going to be. And it's just, again, it's a non-starter. This is just not going to do anything for the business.
Okay, Justin, thank you so much. I want to ask, just hold one sec. Where are you from? What?
Macon, Georgia, and oh yeah, and I spend pretty much every weekends in South Carolina on a working oyster farm farming.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
I would just like the department to respond real briefly on that.
This is a fundamental problem with the complicated bill. It's difficult to understand. So the subtitle water bottoms lease is simply leasing you the water that is the bottom that's inundated by water. Floating cages are absolutely going to be the way that it's going to go. But we were informed by our by our council that we can't lease the water column. The state owns the bottom, and so we're leasing you the bottom, and you're going to float the cage beyond that. So as to the seed question, I just learned that today, that this consortium from North Carolina to Maine is working on. What they're working on, is it the shape, size, color? Couldn't tell you. But you're right, an oyster tastes like where it's grown, which is why Georgia oysters are so good.
It's the salinity mostly, and then the different types of phytoplankton that are in the water.
But you will absolutely be able to float cages.
All right.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Justin. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is Scott here?
Mr. Chairman, representatives, this is my first time doing this. It's pretty exciting. So I'll tell you our story. We are a group of 4 veterans that saw this opportunity with the mariculture coming up, and we want to invest in Georgia because Georgia is pretty far behind, realistically, where we should be in mariculture. with this, we're doing the training with the topwater farming. And it is the only way to go if this is going to be a profitable business. Ask Ernest McIntosh. He's making a living. It's a hard living. And a lot of these farmers' kids aren't taking that wild harvesting on because it's not worth it. We started the Great Georgia Oyster Company because back in 1909, Georgia was the #1 producer of oysters in the country and the world. And we are probably the least producer now, other than Texas, because we aren't doing this. In, I guess, 2012, 2013, this was a subject that UGA was funded to do this research and do the business development. We are in 2019, and it's a great discussion, but this bill right here is not what's going to get us to where we can mirror those states like Virginia and Maryland that are just blowing everybody out of the water with this mariculture. And, as growers, future growers, we can't support that. And it sounds, the top water culture, all the other states that are doing it, they're doing it, and they call it water column. And I think a lot of those details are the devil in the details. And we're not going to get that, by calling it bottoms, and then it's at the discretion. We can't do it, but, you can do bottom cages, but that's just not going to work to make it profitable. But we're ready to invest, a lot of our money into this. And if we can't have a 12-month growing season, then it's really not worth it. Since we started this company, a lot of other opportunities have opened up for us in South Carolina for training. Our mentors have done this, fought the fight to get, the right kind of legislation to make it profitable. And, we're going to be the Great Georgia Oyster Company, but we're going to grow oysters in South Carolina. And then if it's restricted, for 6 months, we're still going to sell oysters in South Carolina. In Georgia, because it's legal. And those same oysters, you can look off of Tybee Island, look at South Carolina, and those are the same oysters in Georgia, the same ones. Yet we can't get them, and it's illegal. But I'll grow them in South Carolina as the Great Georgia Oyster Company and sell them in Georgia because it's going to be completely legal. And then when we can figure out to do this correctly, I think, because there are a lot of states doing it right. And this bill is not the right step forward, in my opinion. And we can mirror that and do it right. And get, a lot of people, like Justin said, the demand, is so much there, and there's no supply, and we're going to be 20 years probably before there's a lot of competition to make this happen. But, I want to put my money in Georgia. I believe in Georgia. And we can make oysters Georgia again, really. But this isn't the right way forward. I'd really like to help, plan this out, get the experts. But there's a lot of red tape. And I only have 3 minutes.
All right. Well, thank you, sir. And let me say thank you for your service. Very much so. And we've got one question. Is this Representative Bruce?
Again, I'm just listening to you guys as doing this every day. What's missing from the bill that is causing the problem for you?
Have you got time?
Not a lot.
I
but
know. I think the specifics, calling it topwater farming, some of the stuff it says cages. We just went through a symposium, and there's a whole bunch of stuff that isn't called a cage.
Well, let me just I didn't mean to interrupt you, but let me just say this. Didn't we just say that legislative council just qualifies this term? We can do top water. Is that not?
So, not legislative council, I misspoke. Our department council advised us that we should not call it the water column. The state owns the water bottom, and therefore through the legislation, the statutes that we have, we can lease the water bottom. But that is, the intent is to allow for floating cages.
So I don't understand where the disconnect is there. If we can do what y'all are wanting to do, what's the disconnect?
I guess the disconnect is the states around us, they call it water column, and that definition means something. And right now it says the title bottoms, and to me that says bottom gear all day long. And if it's at the discretion, we may not allow top gear.
I hear what you're saying, but at the same time, our guys are sitting here saying you can do that. So I'm not kind of following what Representative Tarvin.
And I think maybe the water bottom doesn't have to follow your product. You're talking about the consumer is going to frown on water bottom.
No, sir, the water bottom oysters are the oysters for 35 cents. If you're going to get the wholesale dollar oysters, you have to do top water.
You're going to do top water.
Right.
But what the bill calls it doesn't mean it's not doing what you want to do. That's all I got to say.
Okay.
Question.
Yes.
I was trying to, Representative Bruce's question was similar to mine. I'm trying to understand very quickly and pointedly, if you can tell me, you just said this bill will not create an oyster industry in Georgia that is sustainable, essentially. So I want you to tell me why. So first, if I can finish. First of all, we've already answered the understanding, and the goal is to allow you to farm these off the bottom. I know you're concerned about the description of the name, but we have that in every state. We deal with statutes all the time. We have homes called, to look at Representative LaHood over here, personal care homes in Georgia that are called adult foster homes in Florida. Everything we do has a different name in a different state. Bottom line is that issue's been answered by the department. The expectation is people would be farming these off of the bottom in the water column in this bill. So that takes care of that one, right?
Okay.
Okay, what's the next one? What is going to keep us from having an industry here? What is the next issue?
Restricting it to 6 months.
All right,
It has to be 12 months.
This bill doesn't say 6 months.
Well, you've said that it's up to the discretion.
We've
and
allowed discretion. The department has said they anticipate and expect a year-round harvest, which surprised me, by the way, being a guy that was born and raised on the coast. But so the understanding and the expectation and the goal is year-round farming. But they've explained that if you have an interest of public safety, they feel like they need the discretion to close a season. So that's that issue. So that alone
Sir,
would prohibit an industry. All right, I got you. So I accept that. What's the next one?
Okay, I don't agree with
What's
that.
the third one?
The importation of seed
Okay.
is limited to two states, correct?
No.
Based on that bill?
No, sir. That's not correct. This bill does not list states. It simply says the state bureaucracy that deals with protecting the coast is going to certify where they come from in the protection of the coast. So we just answered that one. What's the next one? You asked us how much time we had. What's the next one?
Okay.
I've got plenty of time.
All right.
We want you to farm these oysters.
We want you to farm these oysters.
Yeah.
I don't want this bill if it doesn't accomplish what I'm trying to accomplish. I don't hear an answer to
you're
why it won't do
saying
that.
that-
So tell me.
You're
you're
saying that
helping
it's at the
me.
discretion. Florida and Alabama have put it into the statute what the rules are. It's not at the onus of the farmer or the producer to make sure they can ask DNR to ensure that we can harvest. So if I have to go through my own process to ask DNR, well, it may not happen because it's at the discretion. But if the statute says I have to meet A, B, and C, and I can pull my oysters out like Alabama does in an hour in the warm months and put them in a fridge, then I can pull that off. But it's currently at the discretion of the DNR. The other two states allow that. And if I don't meet that, then I have requirements that I got to put those oysters back in the water. And to correct you, sir, it's farming and everything's geared towards wild harvest and changing what the wild harvest. This is a completely different thing.
No, I understand that. That's
and
why I want to hear
we
your
could blow
concern.
this, up and make something, and we could be in the top, 15.
That's what we want.
Producers, but I don't think that we're going to get there like this.
You don't see this as an improvement over
I no
farming
think it's a
in
great
Georgia?
conversation, but I think, the advisory board, the proposed one, isn't the best.
Advisory board?
I think what Alex was saying.
Well, I tell you what, we're killing a lot of time.
Yeah,
back and
there's
forth.
probably others that need to
Thank
speak,
you.
but
Well, yeah,
you've
we've gotta-
answered my question, and I wanted to know which I put check marks by those that are.
But farming is a year round, and you say everything's seasonal, but when you farm
It-
cows, it's year round, and when you farm oysters,
It's-
it's not a wild harvest because you're putting a product in the water and you're using the water as like a pasture, and then you're pulling that product out.
Okay, thank you,
It's
sir.
not a wild.
Thank you.
All right.
Is Charles here?
I am. I'm gonna be the easiest one, because they pretty much covered everything. But if I don't sit up here, I'll have to hear it all the way back to Macon how I just sat over and do a doggone thing. So, but we've covered a lot of things, and I think a lot of it is it is a big change, and we have done some research on our end as well as we can with our mentors and all in other states, and the terminology in this is a lot different than what we've been hearing. So there's a lot of trust and a lot of understanding and a lot that has to go through. You're a little defensive about it, and I know you've been working hard, and I don't mean it a bad
I'm not
way.
defensive about it.
but
I'm trying to get answers.
I understand. I think that what's going to happen is, as we get into this and we have a better understanding of what the end game is or the end goal is, I think that it's something that can work. But the way it reads right now to a layman, as far as being in this big house that we're in, it's a lot of words twisting. It's just a lot of different things, and I think it's something that's going to have to work itself through. It's uncomfortable reading something like that because it's a lot of hithertos and those, and we see.
Amen. Amen.
And we see it, rather than starting from scratch and writing something, it's kind of just some mark throughs and stuff like that. So it makes it kind of complicated. But I do think there's an opportunity for us to do great things here in Georgia through listening and learning. And I think that with the right people getting together, I think this is something that could really go well.
Mr. Charles, I want to thank you for your comments, and I think you're spot on. Anytime we pass legislation, there is no perfect piece of legislation. That's why we have to come back here every year, because we have to fool with it here and there. But I'm gonna tell you this: that department that's sitting right there and that commissioner,
yes, sir,
they're out to make us the best oyster state in America. So we're gonna move on with them. Chairman McCall has a question.
Can you make an amendment for that?
Can I ask DNR something? I grew up, you don't eat oysters without an R in the month. How many people are gonna have to get sick before the feds shut y'all down? I thought it'd be one, but anyway, 2 people.
2 people constitute an outbreak. With an outbreak, in order to investigate where it comes from, you close down the growing area. That growing area might have 1 harvester in it. It might have 5 harvesters in it, depending on how the leases are set up. But two illnesses constitute the outbreak.
And y'all ain't got no say-so over that,
No,
right?
No,
Is that, okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Tarman.
No, I'm
You done?
I'm
You done okay?
I'm still thinking about deer hunting.
Leader Laricchia.
I just wanted to address quickly your concern about it not being specifically listed in the law about the column or about the months. We have noticed, or I have, let me just use me as an example. I have noticed in dealing with our Department of Natural Resources or Coastal Resources or advisory panels and boards that it does allow a little bit more collaboration and cooperation and flexibility. Because if you put every word of every concern in this bill, it would be that thick. And the other thing you're going to have to do is go back and change that law. But when they start to put together the rules and the promulgating or whatever that word is about these ambiguous, what did you call those oysters? But I'm just saying, there's a lot of opportunity for you guys to say you said it better than anybody we had today. It's going to be a little bit of learning on both sides about how we do it, but I can promise you this, and that's what Chairman Rhodes said. These guys want you to make more money in Georgia farming oysters than any other state in the nation and be able to do it with limited regulation. And so I think you'll be shocked how well people will work together.
Thank you, sir.
Follow up. The regulation as far as food safety is never a concern. We want all of that we can have, always.
Sounds like you're gonna have the best conversation.
Representative Williams.
I've listened. I like the bill. I know that Representative Petrie is trying to do the best for the state and for the growers. But I must say, I don't always agree with critics, but I do better when I listen to them. And I still say I like folk that have had mud under their fingernails to help me do this. And if it needs, you can quickly perfect this thing and beat crossover. But I just think that sit down and listen with them. That we do not agree with, move on. But I don't want to ignore concerns of people who going to have skin in the game. They got skin in the game. I want to hear the good, the bad, and the ugly. And then somewhere is common ground that everybody can live and be happy on. And I'll be very honest with you. I always had a problem with implied consent. I mean, you know, you either give me 12 months or a year good out, because the best intentions get lost up here. I don't care how hard we try, but that's all I'm saying. I think it's great. I think this bill is good, but I certainly want them to have some input, because they the ones got skin in the game.
Thank you, sir. We've got one more person. Is Doug here?
Looks like
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, members of the committee. My name is Doug Mile, representing the Georgia Chamber of Commerce. And Chairman Petrie, thank you for your comprehensive and passionate introduction of this bill. And Chairman, as we've seen, there is passion when you're establishing a new industry, but the Georgia Chamber supports the objective to establish a new oyster farming industry in regions of coastal Georgia. This bill is proposing the development of an exciting new industry that will provide investment and employment opportunities in coastal regions of the state for future oyster farmers, processors, and other support industries. And as you noted, Chairman, if we reflect on the developments of oyster farming in other nearby states, it is possible to envision that in a few years there could be a vibrant and profitable multi-million-dollar oyster farming industry capitalising on the unique capabilities and qualities of Georgia's coastal regions. The Chamber is confident in the regulatory expertise of DNR and the Georgia Department of Agriculture to build on the framework outlined in this bill and to work with industry leaders to establish conditions to protect the integrity of production and food safety aspects of this new industry opportunity. Importantly for consumers, they can have confidence the application of the principles outlined in this bill and the expertise of dedicated oyster farmers will deliver a high quality product. The Chamber also wishes to acknowledge the contribution of the UGA Shellfish Research Laboratory to studies, training and new technologies to support the development of this opportunity. The UGA Shellfish Laboratory is the home to the state's first oyster hatchery and was launched in 2015. And for a new industry, that's a great resource to have in position already. As with any new industry, there will be challenges, and the gentlemen before me have articulated those, and many experiences to learn from as the industry gains its footing. We believe the framework outlined in this bill is workable and will provide regulators and industry participants with flexibility and certainty, and should provide experienced participants confident to consider investing in this growth industry. And as somebody who has in a previous life launched 2 national agricultural industries, you can't get it all right putting it in legislation. You must have flexibility and confidence that you can all come together with regulators and legislators and industry to fine-tune these things as you get underway. But what we see here is a great opportunity to really capitalize on the qualities of Georgia's coastal regions to develop a world-class product, and we do respectfully ask this committee to support House Bill 501. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Do we have any questions? Does anybody else have any more comments they'd like to make? Does any- Does anybody want to take action? Yes, sir. We've got a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Got a second. Is there any discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? It moves on. And I just want to make, laws are made, and we come back here every year and we fix and evolve things. So I'm sure we're going to have a lot more conversations about this matter. And I thank y'all for your input.